Okay, um, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to BrightGen's Summer 20 release webinar. This will be our first since the lockdown in March, so we hope you're all keeping safe and well. Those of you who normally join us and are used to the obligatory sirens from all the emergency vehicles running past Ginetta House, obviously that won't happen as we're now broadcasting from our own houses, but you might then end up with some petrol streamers and chainsaws instead. So apologies if you get any of that interference. In a second, I'll be handing over to you to the talented Mr. Buzzard, aka BrightGen CTO Keir Bowden, to give you the highlights of the Summer 20 release, which is going live for some of you on the 10th, i.e. this Friday, and then the 17th and 18th as well are release dates as well. Just the 600 pages for this release, so Kira saved you going through them yourself, and as you can see there's well, the first, I like the first item being it's been emotional. So I'm interested to find out what that is. But there you can see the topics that Keir will be covering as part of this webinar. We will be recording and we will be sharing the slide deck as well. So if there's any items that you want to discuss or rerun or discuss in a little bit more detail, please do contact your friendly neighbourhood service manager, i.e. myself, and I'd be more than happy to arrange that for you. Okay, so without further ado, let's hand over to the man himself, Mr. Bob Buzzard. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Clive. I'm assuming you'll tell me through some other mechanism if you can't hear me, but I'm assuming you can. So yeah, it's been emotional. I'm pleased that you picked up on that because I was trying to think of other ways to. We've had fond farewells, we've had hasta la vista. For those that aren't fans of Guy Ritchie's movies, this is how Vinnie Jones said goodbye in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. It's been emotional, gentlemen. So this is basically where we wave off features that are going to live on a farm in the country because they've outlived their usefulness. So customizable forecasting is retired. We've been talking about this for a long time now, so I imagine everyone's quite bored of seeing that. It has retired in summer 20, so it's the last time you'll see it on the slide of fond farewells. It's been emotional, etc. If you haven't already, you really need to switch to collaborative forecasting if you want to do any kind of forecasting going forward. The Salesforce mobile web app is no more. So this was a version of Salesforce that you could access from your phone or tablet's browser. And it looked like Salesforce 1, but it ran in the browser and you still had to log in every time, etc. A bit of a halfway house. So that's no longer available. So you either need to use the installable application on your phone or other tablets. But if you're running an iPad with iPadOS, which is, I think, has just been released, you can access the full Salesforce site via Safari. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the webinar. Original territory management is now in its final year. So again, if you're using that, you need to think about moving over to territory management 2.0. Data.com Prospector and Clean licenses will be retiring at the end of the month. Again, we'll be pleased to see the back of those because we've had to talk about them at several webinars now. The Pardot legacy B2B marketing analytics apps are retiring, and these will no longer be updated as of this release. So if you follow the short link shown, that will give you details on upgrading to version 2.0 of those applications if you still need to use them. Support for non-Chromium Edge. So for those that aren't Windows users and maybe considering becoming Windows users, Edge was the follow-up to Internet Explorer, and Edge has been rebased to have the Chromium runtime inside it. So there is a non-Chromium Edge and there is a Chromium Edge. The non-Chromium version, so the original Edge, support for that will finish at the end of this year, and the same applies to Salesforce for Outlook. Legacy folder sharing will go in the Winter 21 release, which might sound like a long time away, but actually that's sort of October, November of this year, because the winter release is always named for the following financial year. The UI namespace components will no longer, Lightning components will no longer be supported as of summer 21. They will continue to work as they currently do, but if you hit problems with them in your future want to change the use of them, Salesforce will decline to provide support. And finally, Einstein Voice Assistant hasn't made it out of the beta stage. It was in beta the last couple of releases, and now it's gone. So this is one of the reasons we always advise extra caution if you're using beta features. They may not survive, so don't pin your hopes on them. So next up, we've got some enhancements to general Salesforce features. As usual, it's the supported browsers. I won't go through all of these, but probably the key takeaway here is that even if you've got extended support for IE11, you've got less than 6 months to go on that, so you really need to make a decision and move to another browser. You can now access the full Salesforce site on your iPad using the latest iPad OS, which apparently is also known as iOS 13 Plus. I haven't actually used it myself, so I can't swear exactly. And it only supports landscape orientation. But this is the full Salesforce site. It's the full Lightning experience. You're accessing it via the browser, so you still have to log in the same way that you would if you accessed it from your desktop. It's not an installed application. There's a minimum resolution required, 1024 by 768. The first edition iPad had that, so I can't imagine that's actually going to be an issue. There's a couple of other things that you can't do. You can't hover because you haven't got a mouse pointer to hover over anything. You've got a finger and you'd be pressing something. You can't access the setup screen, so you can't actually configure Salesforce through your iPad. And you also can't use Visualforce or any other type of iframe. So Lightning components only in terms of custom UI. Next up, I really like this feature, split view. So this is within a list view. You can access record details without leaving that list view. So much like you would in an email client where you can access a message without leaving the mailbox with its list of messages. So when you're in this split view, when you click on a record on the list view on the left-hand side, the right-hand pane displays the record details. Important point to note, split view is only available for objects in the Lightning navigation bar. So if it's not one of the ones you see across the top in one of your applications, then you won't be able to access it in split view. Multi-step walkthrough. So if you use things like WalkMe, I think is one of them. There's probably a few others as well. Actually, often when the first time that you use Salesforce, some areas of standard functionality, it'll pop up saying, let's do some introductions, and then there'll be 4 or 5 pop-ups that you read, and then you dismiss that and move on to the next one. So this is kind of guided rather than just a straightforward in-app prompt. This is guiding through a number of steps to bring someone up to speed. Unlike prompts, this requires you to have a My Trailhead subscription, which is not included with the base license. So there's definitely an additional cost here. That said, if you've been considering My Trailhead and you haven't quite taken the plunge yet and you think this might tip the balance, you can have a 30-day free trial to figure out if it's going to be suitable for you and if it's going to deliver the way that you were hoping it will. There's a new in-app guidance builder, so along the lines of the Salesforce Lightning App Builder, and probably 1 or 2 other builders as well that I don't use that regularly. So basically, this is your one-stop shop when you want to create some in-app guidance, including walkthroughs. So if we look at the orange call-out numbers, starting at 1. So on the right-hand side, the right-hand sidebar, that's where you specify the guidance type, prompt type, and position. On the left-hand sidebar, number 2, that's where you specify the steps when you're creating a walkthrough. Number 3, the top left, is a gear icon that will take you back to settings. Number 4, that's helpful information, useful tips. I guess your mileage may vary as to how useful you find them, but that's the intention behind it. Number 5, so that's a drop-down list of other in-app guidance in the page. Number 6 is the status of the guidance that you are currently editing. So we've moved over to the right-hand side there. And number 7 is action buttons, so actions you can take on what you're currently working on, much like any other page in Salesforce. So hopefully that layout is familiar. So some enhancements to surveys next. You can now create or update records from responses. And you can map answers to 1 or more record fields, but you can also map constants. If there's a value you always want to go into one of those records that you're creating off the responses, and you don't want users to have to fill it in, you can map a constant. You can personalize questions and the welcome page with Salesforce data using merge fields, and you can now use surveys for post-chat feedback. And finally, there's a new answer type shown in the screen grab here, which is like or dislike. Some other general enhancements. When your users click on a URL that is external to Salesforce, they will now get a redirect notice telling them that they are being taken elsewhere unless that address has been pre-configured in an allowed list. So if you've ever signed up for Salesforce events from a web page, you often used to go to like a holding page saying you're about to be redirected. Do you want to do this? You got 5 seconds before we send you through, type of thing. So your users will see something like that. So something to prepare them for. If you're using the Lightning Chrome extension to work in dark mode, that's being disabled as part of this release. My understanding is there's some performance issues with it in summer 20. And finally, HTTPS is required for all Salesforce connections, which absolutely everyone should be using anyway, because HTTP really is not secure. Okay, next up, moving on to Sales Cloud. First off, we have some Einstein enhancements. The score field is now labeled Opportunity Score in all locations. Previously, it had some minor variances, which could be confusing. Field visibility now guides the contributing factors to the score you see. So if you can't see the amount field won't be a contributing factor in the score that you see. And the score now also takes into account price books, products, and quotes. And finally, on the lead score, activity data is now a contributing factor to that score. So another time saver, guidance is now available in Kanban view. So item 1 on this screenshot opens and closes the detail panel on the right. Item 2 is the first 4 fields from the compact layout. And item 3 is the key fields and guidance for success. Even more interesting, you can edit those key fields inline in the panel. So basically, if you're going in to update an opportunity and you just need to update 1 or 2 of the key fields, as part of that, there is no need to leave the Kanban view and navigate to the record. You can edit that inline on that page. Some Pardot changes. So these have been split over 2 timelines. So in June, there were some changes made. And I'm guessing that's because summer 20 was originally supposed to hit Salesforce in June as well. But obviously with the current pandemic, that got delayed slightly. So in June, all SSL-enabled assets will now be delivered over HTTPS. Personal account syncing can now be enabled without needing to contact Salesforce support. So it should save you a little bit of time there. Older emails are no longer taken into account for advanced email metrics. So namely, the advanced email metrics are the list email report on the interaction and email client tabs. Anything older than 14 months is no longer included. That's the cutoff. And new accounts have the handlebars merge language by default, which is the new way of introducing Salesforce data into things like emails. And existing accounts can upgrade to that, but it's not enabled by default. And then in summer 20, you will be able to manage users from Salesforce setup using Salesforce User Sync. You will be able to upgrade to the V2 Pardot connector, which I'm sure is much better than V1. Pardot developer sandboxes are generally available, so that's something I know we've been eagerly waiting for, the ability to actually try functionality out in a sandbox, or rather than having to do some dreadful hackery to try and try things out but hide them. And finally, you can see engagement data on opportunity records as shown in this screenshot. And some other Sales Cloud enhancements. You can now have up to 6 opportunity splits. That's up from 3. Feature parity change. Big deal alerts are now available in the Lightning experience. Can't be bad. Custom report types are now available for price book entries, so you can report against your usage of those. And email addresses can now be internationalized on the left-hand side of the @ character. The domain, the right-hand side of the @ character, has been supported for some time, but this allows you to actually internationalize the individual's name. There's been some security changes for guest users, which we'll touch on a bit later. But because of that, you should check that any Visualforce emails that rely on guest user access still work as you expect them to. You can create quick actions to assign tasks to queues. That's quite nice. So they don't have to be owned by users anymore. You don't have to duplicate tasks across multiple users if you want to assign a task across. And finally, you can show confetti on any step when that step is complete, and see confetti in the Kanban view, which I'm sure is something that we've all been desperately waiting for and hoping would come in a release sometime soon. So moving on to Service Cloud, general enhancements in Service Cloud. In chats, agents can now see Einstein reply recommendations and choose from a list. The chat header has been improved. I see in the screenshot here. It's narrower and you can brand it and include a logo. You can also create a custom chat header using Lightning Web Components if you want to go completely off on your own styling and your own content. And you can now determine agent capacity based on accepted work items rather than the previous approach, which was based on the number of open tabs. While I pause to take a quick drink of water. Okay, next up, bots. So the event logs for bots have been expanded. They give deeper insights and ease the troubleshooting of complicated bots. Bots now support skills-based routing. So the bot can now attribute multiple skills to a conversation, and when it's time to hand that off to an agent, based on those skills, it can match it to the best available agent. Multiple languages are now supported by bots, very European, English, Spanish, French, German, Italian, and Portuguese. And in beta, there is Chinese simplified, Chinese traditional, and Japanese. And the bot builder has received some love, including bulk actions in bot training. Case classification. So this now predicts lookup field values as well as pick lists and checkboxes. Can also identify cases with low confidence predictions. So when a record has been processed for prediction purposes, there is another object created to record what happened. And this object now includes information about whether the record is automated, what fields were changed, or if it didn't reach the required confidence level. So if you're really interested in the nitty-gritty detail there, you can get access to that. And there's a new component for Service Console, as shown here. You have to update the layout to add it. It won't just automatically change to the new version. Okay, knowledge next. You can now change the owner of a knowledge article, and that can be a person or a queue. You can track when an article is used in a chat, in a messaging session, or in a social conversation via the linked article list, and you can now filter reports by data category. That's it. Normally we get a bit more around knowledge, so smaller amount this particular release. So moving on to analytics. A number of enhancements to Einstein Analytics. So recipes can now run after syncs, which doesn't sound like a lot, but basically you had to guess as to when the sync might finish and try and schedule the recipe to run sometime after that. So if things are running slow, your recipe could kick off before your syncs are completed. So now they can the completion of the sync can trigger the recipe, so no more guessing. You can now schedule data sync, data flow, and recipe intervals to run at intervals of less than an hour, as long as you have the Analytics Plus license. If you don't have that license, you can still do it, but you need to contact Salesforce and ask them. So you can't do it as quickly for sure. Recipes can now send notifications when they finish, and they can do that every time when there are warnings or when there are errors, depending on the information that you want to receive. The template gallery has been enhanced, so you can check out what your dashboard should look like before making a decision to use one of them. And for the more code-focused of us on this call, there's now a VS Code extension for Einstein Analytics, and that integrates all the CLI commands that are available for Einstein Analytics into VS Code, and it also adds things like code completion and error highlighting when you're editing JSON files, so it'll give you a lot more information when you're creating those files. So that, again, should be a time saver. And finally, you can now blend data from multiple data sets in the Explorer and query this blended data as you would a single data set, so you don't have to do the kind of manual joining that you used to have to do before. Okay, next up we have communities. So you can override standard actions in Lightning communities, which I really wish you could do in the standard Lightning experience as well, because it's something I've been wanting to do for some time. So you can replace the standard new and edit functionality with custom components. And you have to configure this, you have to enable it via Workspaces administration. The navigation menu, tile menu, and CMS collection components now support personalization inside the component. So you can show a different navigation to specific audiences in the navigation menu. In addition to the automated refresh of the sitemap, which guides search engines crawling your community, you can also manually generate a sitemap for your community once every 24 hours. So if you make a change and you want to push that out quickly, then you can do that, but you can only do it once a day. So make sure you pick the right time. And there's a new tile menu. And to use it, you have to delete the current one, which cannot be recovered. So always test in a sandbox before you make these kind of changes. Just make sure it works exactly as you need it to. There's a new user profile menu component that you can customize to show the user's company logo and company name. Multi-level navigation now opens a sub-menu. So you go down, you click on something, it replaces the menu with a sub-menu with appropriate arrows backwards and forwards, whereas it used to expand, which could end up taking up quite a lot of real estate. When you're building Lightning Web components rather, for a community, the new Salesforce community module lets you access information about that, so one for the developers again there. And for the configuration and development types, the experience bundle metadata type now includes theming information. So the sort of thing that appears here when you're configuring the theme will also be available to create through metadata and deploy. Okay, moving on to mobile. So the requirements for the mobile application have changed. You now need Android 7.0, which means my poor old 5-year-old Sony isn't going to be able to work with it anymore, or iOS 12 Plus. Salesforce doesn't test every device. They use a subset that are documented at the short link shown. A couple more Android changes. You can now clear the cache data at any time, whereas previously you had to log out and log back in again. Very irritating if you were going through a development cycle. And you can now access all lists on the Android homepage, whereas before it was the two most recent. Report highlights, a new feature in mobile. So these show summaries of up to 8 key metrics, including average accounts, grand totals, subtotals, record counts, and formula column results, which saves your users having to scroll through an entire report on a mobile device, which isn't always fun. And you can reorder the navigation for Lightning apps. So basically on the app, you click the pencil icon that you can see there with edit next to it. And then once that opens, you've got the little grab bars on the right-hand side of the list. The arrows are replaced with those grab bars, and you can just grab those and drag them into the order that you want to. As mentioned earlier, mobile web browser application has been retired. In iOS 13 and onwards, tapping Salesforce links in emails now opens the record straight away in the Salesforce app, whereas if you're using it at the moment, you'll be familiar with the do you want to open this in the Salesforce app when you press on the link to the record. And the push notification per hour limits have gone up as shown here. So next up, a completely new feature, quite unusual for the summer release, but indicative of the times that we're in, work.com. So key to work.com is the command center, which is all about helping you get back to work safely and figure out what's going on with your employees and your places of work. So the command center, you have the following sections. You have workplace status, and that shows, basically allows you to break down your sites into various areas and decide whether they are open for business, closed for business, or on the way to being open. You have wellness status, so this contains the results of wellness surveys conducted on your employees to see how they're doing. You have the task list, which is actions that you need to take, and that really is at the moment just a list of tasks. You might hear some grandiose terms for it, but it really just is a view onto some tasks that have been assigned to you. And then at the bottom you have the COVID-19 tracker powered by Tableau that includes global data from community experts by all accounts. Work.com also includes shift management. So the idea of this is that you define your areas of your site, which may be buildings, maybe floors, maybe offices, and then you set limits to the occupancy, how many people can be in there, and the density, how many can be in a specific space. And once you've got that in place, you can then define shifts to stagger arrival times and make sure you don't have everybody arriving in the lobby at the same time or needing to get into the lift at the same time, etc. So staff manage their own availability and shifts via a mobile application. So this is a new feature. It's a new application, work.com, and it does come with a license cost. So you'll need a platform starter and you will need the work.com add-on which you'd have to contact your account executive to find out what that is currently priced at. Okay, next up, customization. So flows, Summer 20 introduces after save flows. So these are flows that are triggered to run after a record is written to the database. If you remember in Spring 19, we had before save flows. So this is the flip side of it. Once it's hit the database, we can then trigger some processing without having to go via Apex code. You can access fields set by the database, access the same elements in the toolbox as auto-launched flow, and you can create and update related records as you see fit. And the screen grab here shows the setup for an after save flow. So it's when a record is created and after the record is saved. Very nice. You can now trigger a flow when a platform event is received. Previously, we had to run a process builder that then triggered the flow, or capture it in a trigger and then trigger the flow, which is always really annoying because you don't want to have to do one thing just to make something else happen. So flows can now go directly off of platform events. And also, if you've used platform events in process builder, you don't need the object that you had to add in to make it fit with the process builder's view of the world. When debugging a flow, you can now enable rollback mode. So this rolls back synchronous DML only. Use with care if you're testing an org connected to any live systems, for example, because if you've made a call out, that call out will have happened and there is no way of rolling it back. The new flow page has been reworked, showing recommended flows and available templates, as shown in the screenshot here on the right. And the start component has also been changed to show more information. Basically, what it shows here is the trigger and when the flow will run. You can now get guidance when building flows. So there's an example here that after I've started the loop, it's saying you need to close the loop. So for those that are relatively new to flow, they might find this quite useful and quite helpful. When launching a flow from a quick action or lightning app page, you can now pass the record rather than just the record ID and then querying the data yourself based on the record ID. You can save yourself a step, which is quite nice. You can run flows in a system context if you need to bypass CRUD and field level security checks. So you're doing something that needs elevated permissions. You have that capability now in Flow, whereas previously you'd have had to go out to Apex. When you transition back to a screen component, so if you're in a loop, for example, it will contain the latest changes to the data made by the flow, whereas previously it would have reflected the original state, the initial state when the flow was entered. And finally, the lookup component has been enhanced to match against any searchable field. And final page on flows, error emails and now sent if a platform event cannot start a flow or restart a paused flow. It's a rare occurrence, but at least you'll know. There's a new report type and sample report to show flow usage, and that's roughly what it looks like. And the debug logs now track limit consumption, so you can see what kind of impact you are having on the system, the database, the platform, etc. A few other changes around customization. The full view is now generally available. So we've covered this in previous webinars. Full view is a kind of compact, compressed view that shows the details of a record and its related lists in a single page, suitable for printing, for example. The secure guest user record will be activated in summer 20. So the setting will be enabled. So this is something we talked about, I think, at reasonable length in the last webinar. So take a look at the short link. You'll see the details and the timeline. There's loads of information at that link. But basically, the guest user is going to become more locked down. So you need to make sure that that's not going to impact anything that you might have built. There's a new minimum access user profile. So use this when you need a user with least privilege that you can give additional capabilities via permission sets. You can now store multiple addresses for individual and personal accounts. So use the contact point address field, and you can also reference this from a contact point consent record. And finally, you can customize the engagement channel field on consent records to meet your customers' unique needs. Okay, so now on to my favorite topic, development. So the Lightning Message Service is generally available. This is something that went into beta in spring 20, I think. So this allows communication across the various UI technologies that Salesforce provides. So Lightning Web Components can talk to Aura, and they can both talk to Visualforce, and Visualforce can talk to both of them. Includes the utility bar, and it can either be on the visible page or the entire application, so it can be picked up by components that are in hidden tabs. A few updates to Lightning Web Components. You can now share CSS between Lightning Web Components rather than having to duplicate it if you want them all to look the same. Permissions can be set in can be checked in the component to ensure the user has appropriate privileges rather than requiring you to head back to the server and confirm them there. There's a new isConnected property, which allows you to determine if a component is connected when something happens asynchronously. So, for example, a callback fires or a promise resolves when a response is received from the server. If the user has navigated away from that particular page or has changed something on that page, you can determine whether you need to do anything with that result by checking the isConnected. And finally, you can query child elements by HTML tag and name. So this brings us to the end of the generally available features. Everything we talk about now is in beta or earlier. I'm just going to pause there and ask if we have any questions, Clive. And I'm not seeing any questions. I'm not hearing anything from Clive, so I don't know if he's still muted. Cool. Okay, right. I will continue on then. So beta features. So there's a reason we have the caution sign here, a flag on all sides referring to beta. These are preview features and are not part of the services in your master subscription agreement with Salesforce. They are not supported, so if you have problems, you'll be on your own. If you're a part of the beta, then they'll probably be interested to hear what problems you're having, but there's no guarantee that that is going to be resolved. They may never go live. Einstein Voice, great example of that in this release. Entered beta, never came out of beta. And they may also be discontinued at any point in time. So don't build anything mission critical around beta functionality. Make sure that you can do whatever you can do without whatever you built at the drop of a hat. So why would you use beta features? Personally, it's a good way of evaluating the functionality and making plans to roll it out when it hopefully becomes generally available. Forewarned is forearmed and all that. So, one for the developers, source tracking in Sandboxes. So source tracking is something that's supported by Scratch orgs, and effectively it's an API that tracks changes that are made either in your local file system or on the org itself. And it makes it really easy to migrate change to and from the Scratch org by running a single command, and that just pulls down only the changed components or pushes up only the changed components. So that's pretty cool. This applies to Developer and Developer Pro sandboxes only, and is supported by the Salesforce CLI and VS Code extensions, and it has to be enabled by a system administrator. Einstein Search, this is still in beta, but it now has a new setup option of Enable Einstein Search, which is a bit more friendly. It supports natural language search, so you can use everyday words, and the permission names have been simplified, and the recommended results in mobile have been improved. So it's all just had some tweaks to make it a bit better. For anyone who's considering a mobile application for their community, you have the concept of the mobile publisher app, which is where you can turn your community into an installable app. And there is the mobile app mobile publisher app playground, which is where you could try things out. So that is now more accessible. Anyone who can access the community can now access the publisher app playground. So this allows you to try out the majority of the features from the mobile publisher. And on iOS, you can easily switch between testing in production, sandbox, and demo modes. Salesforce sharing with knowledge. Yeah, so Salesforce sharing can be applied to Lightning knowledge, Lightning only, not classic knowledge. Essentially, this removes the sharing control from data categories. So they still classify articles, but you no longer decide that someone has access to the articles because they have access to the data category. You have to contact Salesforce to enable this, and you don't necessarily want to jump in and do it because it might not be right for all orgs. So, for example, you can't create rules to share with high volume or guest users because they don't have roles, so they can't participate in Salesforce sharing rules. As always, if you're going to enable it in a sandbox and test it and make sure that it works as you need it to. you can now, in a beta feature, to attach CSV files to report subscriptions. So when you enable this and create a subscription, you don't see an email body. The record details instead are in an attached file, and you can choose the encoding for the CSV file when you're creating the subscription. And this has to be enabled in setup in order to be used. So dynamic forms is our final feature, and this isn't even in beta yet. It's in non-generally available preview, but it is too good and too interesting for us not to at least touch on it. So this is the nirvana of allowing us to break up record fields and sections across a Lightning App Builder page without having to make changes to the page layout and have those reflect across. So this, as I said at the start, this is non-GA preview. So non-GA preview is similar to beta, but it has looser requirements around performance and page load times. So you'll probably find it a little bit slow compared to other aspects of the system. So this also supports visibility rules, so you can make a single page work for multiple scenarios. So my view is when this goes GA the way it's looking is we should be able to do away with having hundreds of page layouts for different profiles, etc., and slightly different requirements, and you'll be able to use visibility rules along with dynamic forms to actually have a really tailored experience for your users. Currently in non-GA preview, it's only available for custom objects. So once you enable dynamic forms, the Lightning App Builder gives you a new tab, as you can see here on the right, next to the components, which is fields, so the list of fields that are on your custom object, and the single additional component, which is the field container. So you have to have a container in order to put the fields into. So field section has to be on the page first. And in this example, I've added a field section to my webinar page in its own tab called Actuals, and I put the actual attendees and duration on it without having to go near the page layout. And also those fields at the moment, and whether this will be the case when it's GA, but those fields at the moment can happily go into the details tab and into the, you can go anywhere on the page basically. You can have multiple copies of them, very powerful. So that brings us to the end of our scheduled programming. So thanks for sticking with us. Slightly shorter this time. I think normally we're near around 75 slides, and this has been 55 slides today. So I'm sure everyone's breathing a sigh of relief for that. And I think a lot of that is because work.com kind of came out of left field and probably reduced the capability of some of the teams in the last couple of months. So as always, we've picked the items we think will be of most interest to our customers. There are other features in there that we haven't covered, and there's plenty more information at the Salesforce release readiness site at the short link shown. There's also a trailhead badge which is available, which will walk you through some of the other features as well as quite a lot of those that we've already covered. And that is it from me as I take a pause and ask Clive if we have any questions.
Well, as per usual, Keir, you've explained it so beautifully. Not a single question. So sorry to disappoint you. Yeah, so just everybody, thanks ever so much for that, Keir. Only the 600 pages this time, so just a little breeze from it, this release. We'll be sending out the slide deck and the recording to everybody. But if there's anything you do want to discuss, as I said at the beginning, in detail, then please get in touch with me. And then we can I can make the necessary arrangements. So I think, Keir, if there's nothing else, we're done for another release.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, everyone. Thanks for coming, and I guess we'll see you in October or November, depending on when the Winter 21 release lands. Stay safe.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.